at this time, I believe. Yesterday was the deadline for bill introductions, so I won't ask for that today. But I will ask if you've reviewed the minutes from January 28th and January 30th, if you have any additions or corrections or a motion to approve.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve.
Is there a second? Jerry and Adam and yeah, we're covered. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We will move on to some presentations from our groundwater management district, and first up is District 1 with Katie Durham, manager.
Perks of going first. You get to work out the microphone here. Excellent. So as was mentioned, my name is Katie Durham from the Western Kansas Groundwater Management District, #1 located in Scott City, Kansas. I'm going to provide our annual report to you for 2024. You should have copies of that report that were submitted earlier this month. It's going to look like this, and then we're also going to go through some PowerPoints to highlight some of the key aspects of the report. Let's see. All right, so this is a map of the district. You'll see that it encompasses parts of 5 different counties. This map also is going to indicate 2 of the locally enhanced management area plans that we're going to be talking through today. As you're aware, the per House Bill 2279, the groundwater management districts were tasked to come up with priority areas and put forth action plans. And so this is a map that shows the 2 current kind of high priority areas and LEMA plans in GMD1. So right there in the middle, you'll see Wichita County. That's our Wichita County WCA and our Wichita County LEMA. And the other 4 counties are in green, showing the 4 county LEMA as well. So a couple quick kind of stats about the district. So it encompasses about 1.1 million acres, about 150,000 of that is irrigated ground. We also have over 20 cattle feeding facilities and more than 3 dairies and quite a significant presence of pork production also, primarily in 3 of our counties. So there's a huge amount of economic resource coming out of that region, and we'll touch on that a little bit as well. Something to keep in mind as well, we are really focused on our domestic water users in smaller municipalities, being that our largest municipality is actually Scott City at about 4,000 people. So again, a couple notes there, quick stats about the district, being established in 1973, encompassing parts of Wallace County, Greeley County, Wichita County, Scott, and Lane County. We have long since really promoted conservation within the district. We actually had a weather modification program for many years. And in the last recent several years, about 10 years, we've been really focused on the WCA development and the LEMA development. And that's the primarily what we're going to be reporting on today and some of the data that we're seeing specifically in Wichita County. So again, the importance of economics, right, and agriculture. So these are going to be for our 5 counties. And most significantly, you're going to see that $1.4 annual billion coming out of Scott County alone. And a lot of that has to do, of course, with the cattle industry. You'll also see that Greeley County actually ranks #1, is the #1 county in Kansas for hogs. So something pretty significant to note there also, and really indicates the importance around these water conservation programs. We have to keep this local economy very rich and thriving in order to support our municipalities and domestic water users. So brief history of the conservation programs that we've worked on. In 2013 and 14, there was efforts to put forth a district-wide LEMA. That did go to a district vote, which is not necessary to implement a LEMA, but we did go ahead and do that at that time. It was not successful at that moment, so we came back to the drawing board. And in 2016 and 17 was the implementation of the Wichita County WCA, which really put more pressure on the communities and the board to continue acting and to continue putting forth a plan for an actual Wichita County LEMA. So there's three main programs again, the active Wichita County WCA, which has water use reductions. It has a 7-year period, ramping up of 29% reductions all the way up to 50%. And then you have in 2021, the Wichita County LEMA, which had individual point of diversion reductions of 25%. That is some of the results that we're going to be reporting on here momentarily, and what we plan to do going into the next 5 years after 2025. And then in 2023, we went through the process of establishing the 4-county LEMA, which covers the rest of the district. And for that LEMA, we used a different type of approach where it was a sliding scale of reductions, 0 to 25, based off of historic use. So that is currently has finished, 2024 was the second year. We're going into the third year, and we're learning a lot about what's needed, different approaches we might want to take in the future, what's worked, what we want to enhance moving forward, and then also, most importantly, what can we give back to producers? What types of other supporting programs through cost share initiatives or other resources are going to help them make these on-farm changes? So this slide was provided to us from the Kansas Geological Survey. Brownie Wilson actually presented on this in particular at the Wichita County outreach meetings. We've had 2 thus far, one in August and one in November. And these meetings are really focused on talking about how the Wichita County LEMA has performed thus far and figuring out what they want to do moving into the future. So far, the consensus is we don't want to go backwards. We're seeing a tremendous amount of success in that county, and stakeholders are really empowered by that, and they want to continue moving those efforts forward and encouraging others to do so. So we've had good attendance at those 2 meetings. We're now in the process of kind of packaging up some of those preliminary recommendations and getting those back out to the community members to further discuss. The hope is that this Wichita County LEMA would actually go into a renewal process starting later this summer. We would go through a hearing, of course, a public hearing, and then if all goes well, it would then renew in 2026. So one of the things to note, you've obviously heard quite a bit about Q-Stable and the work that KGS has done to really refine that. We are continuing to watch Wichita County very closely. It is significantly a high priority area for our district, but we are seeing right now that it does appear to be stabilizing. This is obviously something we're going to continue to watch very closely. We've talked with Brownie Wilson and Jim Butler and others from KGS about maybe refining some of the monitoring wells and trying to find some abandoned wells that we can try to monitor and kind of ramp up that effort a little bit as well. There's also some efforts kind of coming down the pipe with the AEM mapping, which I know you guys have heard about. And we're also going to be working over the next year and a half with KGS on updating our groundwater model, which each district has to make some of these critical decisions on how to approach these action plans and these high priority areas. So we are very, very pleased with what we're seeing thus far in Wichita County, but we know we're not done, and we know we have to very closely continue to monitor and prevent any sort of backsliding. They are proposing at this point in time to write into the next LEMA, so again, starting in 2026, that Q-Stable is going to maintain to be the goal. And so while we're still kind of going back and forth, that is the direction at this time that the board is proposing. So a couple things to note here that I think are really critically important are what have we observed? And that enhanced management obviously is one. We've seen a lot of people leaning into new technologies. Our district does maintain to have a cost share program. We actually paid out about $100,000, actually a little over $100,000 in 2024 for a number of different types of technologies, including, bubbler packages, moisture probe packages, Vanwater and other, autonomous pivot systems. And we're just seeing people really leaning into that technology as a resource for adapting to some of these restrictions and how we can support that further. And so that money is certainly flying out the door. That is our funds. Those are funds that we actually took from the old weather modification program, put in 3 different CDs to be able to gain some interest and use that to then supply funds back to producers through the cost share program. The education and outreach component continues to be a major factor with our annual stockwater outreach and municipal outreach. We had a municipal outreach meeting in Scott City here recently that's outlined in the annual report, and we had great attendance from the different communities. Like I said, we've got a number of different small communities as well as larger municipalities like Scott, large to us. And so hearing from communities like Weskin and Marienthau and others that are these unincorporated communities that are looking for grant opportunities and other resources has been really impactful, and that's something that we're going to continue to really focus on, is helping those smaller communities. A couple up and coming things. We did have, yes, and I mentioned on the KGS AEM mapping, which we're very excited about. We have started also holding monthly state and federal agency meetings where we kind of pull together representatives from several different agencies to meet monthly via Zoom. Right now we've got Playa Lakes Joint Ventures, NRCS District Conservationists, 4-H Extension, the Kansas Water Office Regional Planning Team, Kansas Rural Water Association, K-State Extension, County Conservation District Managers as well. So there's a lot of different folks that are involved in that, so it helps to make sure everyone knows what everyone else is working on, and then we can pull all that information into a newsletter to send out to our stakeholders. So a couple more things here just to note. The renewal of the Wichita County Lima is obviously our main priority. One of the other things that the board has talked about is trying to set forth some long-term goals and kind of a vision for the district, kind of looking 10 plus years out and really defining where we want to be in the future as a community. And so I think that's it's an exciting thing. And I think that the board is very motivated. Our stakeholders are very motivated. The aspect of local control and kind of determining their destiny is something that is very important to them, and really trying to facilitate that and put forth some of these longer term goals. We do have some countywide outreach meetings coming up. The High Plains Aquifer RCPP, which is going to provide a lot of irrigation system evaluation and technologies for producers. We're really looking forward to that, as well as kind of a different project. We're working with the local museum in Scott City and the Kansas Geological Survey on a water and irrigation history exhibit for the community also. There is one other project I wanted to touch on here briefly, was the Western Field of Dreams. That is a private project that is aimed on education and outreach and bringing resources to the community, kind of making a hub where people can go and obtain CDL certifications as well as spraying certifications, interaction with different technologies, kind of having a true blue tech farm that really can test different types of, irrigation efficiency technologies and get that information out to people very non-biasedly. And so we're really excited to be a supporting partner of that as well, and the K through 12 education that might provide. So in closing, a couple things I do want to point out in your report on page 6. I know I went through those programs very quickly, but you're going to see kind of a breakdown on page 6, the history of those programs, how they're kind of what the success is that we're seeing, how some of the goals are actually being exceeded, which we're very excited about, and then kind of indicating what's to come in the future as well. With that, I know we've got a lot to cover today, so I want to be respectful to any questions that you all might have.
Questions? Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Katie. It's so good to see you again. Thank you for the presentation. I'm really excited to hear about the progress in Wichita County, and also excited to hear that you guys are interested in potentially achieving Q stable in the next renewal. So I was just wondering, do you think that's possible within the next renewal, or you think the county is just hoping to eventually achieve that? Or what's the timeline you all are looking at on that?
Yeah, I think at this point in time, most of the county is looking to be at Q stable currently. And the important factor is to just make sure that there's no going backwards. And so I definitely think it's achievable. We're going to continue to monitor and enhance our ability to maybe get some more wells to look at, and with the AM mapping and groundwater model work as well. But we're very hopeful, yes, and we definitely see that as the goal. Yep.
I want to pick your brain just a little bit. A few years ago, you worked in Central California on water issues. How does Kansas compare to what you experienced there in California?
That's a great question. That's a large question. I think one of the blessings that we have here is agency coordination is one thing that I see to be very important. All those agencies I listed off, but DWR, KDA as a whole, KDHE, I mean, we work with all the different agencies very, very well. And that is a partnership that is rare in parts of other areas of the country. And, a lot of the policy that has been implemented, in my experiences personally out there, was more top-down. And I do think there was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction when you see on how some of the on-farm practices reacted, and even some of the investments in the area. But I think that Kansas has a great opportunity through 2279, and the districts are all motivated to move things forward, to do it at a local level, that is a tremendous opportunity. And I think we're going to see good results from it.
I live in this district, so I can attest to the producer adoption of all the things that you guys have been leading. I get a sense that if the state walked away from this and decided we didn't have enough money, and I'm not proposing that in any manner, the producers out there would continue in the same manner that they currently are. They see the value. They're still producing the crops that's necessary for all the added industry within the area. And I commend your board for being leaders and moving forward on this stuff.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Everyone seems very, very motivated. And the first thing that everyone agreed on when we went to that first Wichita County outreach meeting for the renewal was we're not going backwards. So I think that says it all.
Any further questions? Representative Pishney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask at least one question, but since I live just south of that district and so forth, I'm familiar with what you're doing out there as well. And you referenced it briefly, the economics and so forth in your report. Can you expand on that just a little bit more? And when you say they don't want to go backward and then things are working well, how it's working on the economic side as well as the preservation and of the aquifer?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I think the best example actually is one from Wichita County in particular, where there was a large cattle feeding facility that went out and hired an independent engineering firm to do a study on their monitoring wells. They had real-time data and were essentially testing out what we were projecting with the Lima. Because of what they saw in the stabilization of their local stockwater wells, they actually decided to invest another $1 million into that facility. That keeps more than 50 jobs in the Leota, Wichita County area, and is kind of a huge indicator of some of the economic impact we hope to see with these water-saving programs.
And I can attest to that. We have many unfilled jobs out there. Businesses and industry are making investments in areas that they see long-term viability versus areas that aren't dealing with some of their problems. And it's growing rapidly. If anybody has any excess employees, we'd love to have a lot of them out there.
Absolutely.
Representative Pickert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Katie, obviously GMD1 is doing great. How did you guys deal with the kind of slow adapters, people that really weren't buying in, right away?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think a lot of times it came down to needing that one-on-one conversation. These are difficult topics to discuss. They can be very scary. And there was a lot of one-on-one education that we did, making sure that people knew what the water decline was in their respective area really kind of helps them to self-manage more. And a lot of producers were already being incredibly conservative. And so this just really takes it to the next level. To those who were maybe a little bit more skeptical at the beginning, again, with that consistency, that education, the data from KGS and from DWR and others, it just gives true ownership to the future. And we have seen them, we have one individual who in the first year, he budgeted a certain amount, and he was, pretty hesitant about the Lima in general. I mean, I met with him several times, and that first year he overpumped what he was budgeting for the year by a significant amount. And so he went out and he invested in an autonomous pivot and some other technologies and decided to really lean into the data and really challenge it, and was incredibly successful and is now become a real proponent of the plan and what technology can do, and so we've seen a true turnaround there. Yeah.
Any further questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Katie, while we're talking about expanding the AEM mapping in 1 and 3, could you talk about some of the potential benefits that could offer you all to have that additional data?
I just think the more data, the better. I mean, what I've seen preliminary in other areas is really exciting and cutting edge. And I think the opportunity to just make sure that our team and our board have the best tools possible, whether it be future spacing requirement issues, whether it be additional, smaller areas that we need to focus on within these larger plans, all of that is great resource. And we really welcome and are excited about. And hopefully it sounds like later this summer, we're going to be up for that, and hopefully down south as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tremendous resource.
Any further questions? I invite everybody to visit the museum there in Scott City, El Cordeleo. There's a little display about J.W. Lowe, and I think he drilled some irrigation wells in about the World War I time period, so more than 100 years ago. And the engines that ran those wells were much different than the current ones. And he was very successful in doing things out there. But anyway, invitations out there. Katie, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And next we'll move to Groundwater Management District number 2, Tim Bays.
Good morning, Chairman Minnick, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Tim Bays. I'm the manager of the Equisbeds Groundwater Management District number 2 out of Halstead. Wasn't really paying attention to my calendar very closely, and I realized I passed 33 years with the district last week. So I think all that happened at that time, I got a little balder and I can't see as well as I used to be able to. But always appreciate the ability to come speak to you and tell you about what's going on over at the Equisbeds GMD2. I know we got some new members here, maybe some folks that don't know where all the GMDs are. We are the furthest east of the GMDs. We're right on the edge of the High Plains Aquifer System. Established in 1975, and by far the most diverse of the GMDs. We have a large irrigation, obviously. Also have a large municipal and industrial users, along with some others. Recreational has become pretty popular. We've got some stock watering, but on average, we're about 60% irrigation use, around 25% municipal. And that's a big number for the municipal. We supply water, the aquifer does, to over 500,000 folks. I think it's pushing about 600,000 now. We've got a huge Wichita metropolitan complex. We've got the city of Newton, Hutchinson, McPherson, as well as a dozen or more smaller communities. So we've got a huge population in GMD2, which is really quite unique compared to the other GMDs. As I said, irrigation is still the dominant user. Got about a little bit over 100,000 irrigated acres, got around 900,000 acres total. We just wanted to give you a little background there. Obviously, we furnished you with the 2024 report. You have that. I'd be glad to go over some of that if you would go to, I don't know if you could pull up page 3 there on our report. Maybe I just spend a little bit of time talking about our finances before I move on. Yeah, if you could pull that up. Again, it's in your report too, so I'll go, while he's ginning that up, I'll go ahead and talk about that. As far as revenue, that's on page 3. Most of you probably know the districts really don't get any state or federal money unless we have some grants, so almost all of our revenue comes from assessments. We can charge a special assessment to landowners that own 40 or more contiguous acres, and then we can also charge an assessment for water rights. And so most of our revenue comes from that. We also do pick up some from what we call meter sales and reimbursements. That really makes us pretty unique. We actually sell certain types of water meters, not at a profit. We buy them at a discount and resell those. Mostly those are used for irrigation. We also repair meters, which is pretty unique. We are a certified provider for micrometer meters. That's really a good service for our district members, that we can repair their meters. They can bring it in, and we usually can get it back to them within an hour or two. So if an irrigation meter goes down in the middle of the season, we can turn those around. So that's where we get almost all of our revenues from, those assessments and then some reimbursements. Our expenses are on the next page if you go to page 4. And these are unaudited, as you're well aware. Our audit is just about getting finished for 2024. We always have to keep the unaudited. Our expenditures ran last year a little bit over $550,000. Be glad to talk about that. Most of that's salaries, obviously, when you're talking about an office. We're an office of 4. And if you want to go to the next page, is just our assets, which are just estimation of, we don't own much other than our building and vehicle and some weather stations and field equipment. The 2025 approved budget and financial statement are on the next 2. I'd be glad to talk about those, although I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time. I thought I would skip ahead to page 8, and that's our activities that were completed in 2024. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of our activities. Data collection has always been big at our district. My predecessors and our previous board was very committed to establishing a monitoring well network. We own a little bit over 400 monitoring wells that we own ourselves. We collected last year about 2,800 water level measurements. I know Director Calbus with KGS was here last week and talked to you about the 1,400 or so wells that they measure annually. Just in January alone, my staff measured around 650 wells just in our small district. And most of our wells were measured quarterly. We also have always been big in sample collection. We collected 321 water samples last year. Most of those are being analyzed for chlorides or nitrates. We've been doing that for a number of years. I know I reported last year in 2023, we sampled every one of our monitoring wells plus some, and we did a full analysis, an inorganic analysis on those. So we've really got a robust water quality database. We're working with KGS, as I mentioned before. We've transferred, I think, our 13,000 plus water quality records to KGS last year, and they're reviewing that, really looking for trends for chloride and nitrates, both spatially and time. That helps drive our ability to, do we need to look at special management areas? Do we need to expand? Do we need to change anything in our special management areas? We also do a lot of education. A lot of those are similar to the water permit consultations, safe field evaluations. A lot of that's education, just helping our members, helping people that are looking for water, people that are wondering what the regulations are, what can they do, what can they not do, how can we help them conserve water, how can we help them with their water permit issues. Do a lot of that. We also have an active abandoned well program, make sure that we're getting abandoned wells properly plugged. We try to witness, if we can, every abandoned well that gets plugged in our district, we try to witness to make sure that they're done correctly. We can also issue orders to plug wells. We do a lot of inspections. We do some things with inactive wells and also cathodic protection boreholes. I won't go into too much detail. Those are that are put in for corrosion issues, usually on pipelines. We make sure that those are constructed properly and protect the aquifer. Going down there to our other major highlights, like I say, we continue to monitor, especially our oil field brine contaminated areas. I'll talk about those in a little bit. Partnering with KGS to review that data. And then I think one of the big things we did as required by House Bill last year, 2079, was to establish priority areas. And I'll talk about those in just a little bit in a second. We're also still working with the Kansas Water Office and Division of Conservation on implementing the High Plains Aquifer RCPP. That's going to be able to provide monies to irrigation users to upgrade systems to make them more efficient. Still working through that process. We're not quite ready to implement that. I think we're getting close. I think talking to Steve Frost last couple of weeks ago at the Water Authority, I think we're about 90%. We're ready to get that rolling. My board hasn't approved it yet, so I can't go into a lot of details, but we're anxious to get that program running where it'll pay for evaluation of the irrigation system. I know Representative Minix has done that before, and then make recommendations on what kind of equipment upgrades or practices can help that individual user conserve water. I think then if we want to move on to our high plains or our high priority areas on page 19, be a lot easier for me to do it off the map rather than, there's lots of details in your report that you can read, but I'll maybe just go through the map. Up there on the north is an existing area. It's kind of an orangish hashed area. I know you guys have black and white copies, but if you want to refer to the color, and I can provide color copies to anybody that needs them. That's our existing intensive groundwater use control area, McPherson. That was established in 1980. That was due to declining water tables. So the board was very forward-thinking. I believe that was the first IGUCA in the state. Shut down that area to new appropriations clear back in 1980. I think they realized at the time that it was getting over-appropriated, or already had been. Shut that down, so there hasn't been really any new permits other than some small use or some term permits for remediation, those kind of things. So that's an established one, and directly south of there is a newly established priority area looking at potential expansion of that IGUCA or conversion to a LEMA. We've noticed some declines there to the south, not quite as drastic as what's in the current IGUCA, but we have seen some slight declines over time. So that area is what we're looking at to either, like I say, either expand those IGUCA boundaries or maybe convert the whole entire area into a LEMA. Part of that came from the review that was conducted jointly between GMD2 and DWR of that IGUCA in 2016, and then the final report came out in 2020, and that was a recommendation to look at expanding that IGUCA boundaries. Going to the next one to the south, special one area in a green hashed area, that's a special water quality use area. That was established in 1986. That is due to oil field brine contamination. We've been monitoring that. We've got an extensive monitoring well network. Been monitoring that since it went in. It also has special restrictions. If someone wants to move a well or file a new application, plug a well, there are some special considerations. We're not looking at any expansion of that. That is a fairly stable area that's not moving much. We haven't noticed the movement to the north, but our boundaries have that covered. Then we're going to go one more down to the south. That's the Burton Intensive Groundwater Use Control Area. I think a lot of you have heard of the Burton chloride issue. The blue is the existing, and then we're looking at an expansion of that to the south and the east. And the reason is because groundwater movement is to the south-southeast, and we are beginning to see, it's to the east-southeast. We're beginning to see that plume has now migrated outside of that existing boundaries. So we're looking at an expansion of that. And I'll pause maybe there for a minute. There's some traction going on. We've been monitoring that for a long time. Since the early 80s, installed that monitoring well network. The KDHE, along with the water office, of course, we're involved. City of Wichita potentially looking at some potential remediation efforts in that. There was a feasibility report that just came out last month. It's still a draft report. With some potential remediation options. I won't go into a lot of detail. There's still a lot of unknowns. And I think the governor has proposed to move $1 million into the fiscal year 2025 for some engineering on that if we want to move forward with that. So it's exciting. I've been monitoring that for a long time. When I first started, that was my job to go out and sample those wells. It's nice to see some movement now, that potential remediation efforts on that. It's a big animal. It's hard to clean up chlorides when they've spread that much in the aquifer, but certainly we've got some forward thinking, some traction movement, and I'm hoping we can get something started on that. Then over to the west or to your left, we call it a new priority area, although we've really have it established since about 2000. It's an area in the aquifer that is a thin saturated thickness. It can be sort of volatile for declines and rises depending on precipitation and use. We established that years ago. We basically spread apart wells farther, new permits, change applications. They got to be certain further distance from each other to protect from impairment. We've seen some slight declines in that area, so we're going to be examining that over this year to determine if we need to do anything differently. Do we need to potential LEMA in that area or not? And then lastly, I'd say we did go ahead and identify the entire district as a water quality. I won't go into a lot of details on that. We could spend a lot of time. We have a number of water quality issues. Of course, the main one is chloride issues, which are either naturally or oil field brine disposal practices. We've got a lot of other things. We've got nitrates. We've got VOC contamination, grain fumigants, solvents, a lot of little projects, all the way down to gas stations and those kind of things. So we're working with KGS to identify if we need to establish any other areas certainly that's become our focus the last year or so, to really look at the water quality at a finer scale. Then I guess the last thing I'd mention is we believe pretty solidly we're not going to have to do any mandatory cutbacks in GMD2. I haven't really got that far with the board. We talked a lot about Q-stable. KGS did the sustainability assessment for us a number of years ago. We were within about 2% of being sustainable. That doesn't mean 2% district-wide. McPherson County probably needs around an 8 or 10% reduction. And we think in combination with the RCPP and maybe some other technology upgrades, I believe we can tackle that without doing some mandatory cutbacks. That's our goal. We'd rather not do a mandatory. We'd rather solve it with technology and efficiency upgrades. Rest of the district's in pretty good shape. We obviously need to, continue to look at that area there in Reno County. As we work through this RCPP, that might be some areas that we target, these areas that are experiencing these slight declines, to target those areas. I think I don't want to belabor you with anything else. I'd probably stand for questions, but I'd be glad to answer anything you may have.
Any questions? Dr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this presentation. Could you give me just a little more information about this chloride plume over at, which is listed as the new priority area of concern, where it's going south and east from?
Yeah, sure. That was that Burton Iguka area, and most of that was from disposal practices. That was a huge area that was hit really big during the wildcat boom and the oil boom in the 30s and 40s. The disposal practice, when you pump oil out, you get a lot of salt water, and you have to separate that. Past disposal practices were really initially was to dump it in the nearest ditch, stream, creek, whatever. That sort of got frowned upon. So in our wisdom back then, they started putting it into evaporation pits. Well, around the Burton area, it's sandy soil, about 10 feet to groundwater in some areas. So most of that brine went down into the aquifer. Really started to the north and west of Burton, up in the upper portion of the aquifer. Now it's migrated. Groundwater moves about a foot per day in that area, and it's moving to the east, southeast. So over the decades, that has moved both horizontally and vertically. And now it's getting to the point where it's moving outside of that Iguka boundary, so that's why we want to expand those boundaries. I didn't really mention it, but down gradient of that is high-value irrigation and the city of Wichita 55 production wells.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Droege.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I had a question, maybe explore the Cheney Reservoir area a little more. I've heard that maybe the surface water, the groundwater were both a problem. I mean, I know Cheney is low, but I thought that you could maybe touch on that a little.
Absolutely, yeah. So that area that I showed before, that thinner saturated thickness, that area has experienced over the last 3 years a deficit in rainfall big time, which has affected Cheney Reservoir. That is part of the Cheney watershed. So I think last time I looked, Cheney was around, don't quote me, around 55% full, about 8 feet down. So the groundwater, because of that reduced rainfall, has had some declines, especially over the last 3 years. So they really are connected. The stream and the aquifer are connected in that area, and both have, because of the drought, and that area has been hit hard. Some of the hardest parts in the state the last 3 years, that Reno County and then into Stafford area, has really just been extremely dry. So yeah, they are connected, and we are experiencing problems with surface water and groundwater in both avenues.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't actually have a question. I really appreciate, I just want to say I really appreciate how you guys have approached your priority areas and the plans you're starting to develop and the groundwater quality that you guys are already doing. I'm also particularly interested in ensuring that the chloride plume in Burton County gets addressed. So, if there are things that we can do, I'm really interested to help with that. I think that's a big issue in the area. But yeah, I think the update is great, and I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. So thank
I
you.
appreciate those comments. That, the Burton, not to belabor on that, the Burton chloride is going to take some partnerships, obviously, between state agencies, our office, partners, maybe the legislature, because it's a big animal that it's going to be hard to pay for. And so I appreciate the governor looking at putting some money into that, and hopefully we can get that moving forward.
I guess I want to point out some distinguishing characteristics. Your GMD is so much different than the prior presentation in one, and every area in the state varies so much. I appreciate the way you guys are addressing the situation that you have, just as I do GMD 1. So, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to Groundwater Management District Number 5, Orrin Farrell. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee. Name's Orrin Farrell, and I'm the district manager for Big Bend GMD number 5. And if you could bring up our annual report. Just a little bit of background. We cover all or part of 8 counties in south central Kansas, about 2.5 million acres total. We're governed by a 9-member board, 1 from each of those counties, plus 1 at-large member. So over the last year, we've been spending a lot of time working on water quality. So I'm going to really focus on that quite a bit today. If I could direct your attention to our annual report, which hopefully you have in front of you. And if you don't, I can for sure get you a copy of it. Page 1 of our report is our 2024 finances. I have both the income and expenditures on this page. Again, like was said previously, these are unaudited finances. We just completed our field audit just a couple days ago, and so we're hoping to get that finalized here soon. Like Tim had mentioned previously, we get most of our monies in from our assessment payers of the water users. And so our assessments for 2024 are about $1.5 million. We are, to my knowledge, the only district that is assessing at full value, at full amount. So the statute says up to $2 per acre foot for water and up to 5 cents per acre for the dry land, for the land assessment. We assess at those full amounts because we have some very large projects that are coming soon, and we're preparing for those. And so, again, we bring in about $1.5 million every year on those assessment revenues. We have a pretty good cash carryover, which I'll get to in our financial statement in the next page, that we invest those into high-yielding CDs, and we garner that interest income for 2024 is $90,000. We're anticipating about $100,000 in 2025. And then here, going on down, our total expenditures for the year are about $1.1 million. So it's fairly close on what we bring in annually to what we're expending. We do have a little bit of carryover that we do take advantage of and invest. So that's what we're really focused on. Most of our time this year, like I said, is water quality. And so we've been investing in getting proper equipment for that. And then getting out in the field and trying to get those water quality samples gathered and analyzed. Page 2 of our reports, 2024, we have, again, that's other line in our revenue. It's kind of a big number, $90,000 of other miscellaneous. We do own ground. We own about 918 acres of ground that we then lease back out to local farmers and to local hunters for those interests. That is all done in accordance with state statutes through the bid proposal process. But that's the majority of that revenue, that $90,000 that came in last year, is from those leases from the landowners. You'll notice in 2023, make note of a big change in our water management expenditure line item. So you'll notice in 2022 is about $110,000 expended. In 2023 is about almost $700,000 in 2023, but then came right back down to $160,000 this last year. Huge difference. Well, we bought about $400,000 worth of ground that year with one purchase. So that was that big expenditure. So again, if we were to only go based on what we can bring in every year, we wouldn't be able to handle buying ground like that and those large expenditures in any one given time. Watershed planning, you'll notice that's kind of a unique item down there in other expenses or projects and grants. This last year, about $275,000 was expended on that watershed plan. That's for the rattlesnake, and I'll get into more detail about that soon. And we're anticipating that going forward of expending more than that in the years coming. If I could direct your attention to our assets. Next page, please, page 3. So again, we do hold quite a few assets. We try and put as much on here, as much detail as we can, probably too much detail. But again, we do own grounds. We want to make sure that it's known to the public that we own the ground, we own water rights. And so those actual expenditures are here, so it's all very transparent. Of course, some field equipment, field trucks. 2024, we did purchase some water quality equipment to about $8,000 worth of equipment, both for lab analysis. We have a water lab that's not certified, but we offer its use to any water user in the district to bring a water sample in. We'll analyze it for chlorides or nitrate concentrations at no cost and provide that information back to them. We try and use that as a service to our local water users. And so we had to have the proper equipment to do that. If I could roll forward a few more pages on page 5, I'm going to go ahead and get into the meat of what we've been doing. So our activities are very much similar to what you may have seen in our report last year. What I really tried to do is, again, keep that background in there, but really update on what we've been doing here this year. So in the watershed plan, environmental impact statement development, the EIS as we call it, 2024 has spent a lot of time coordinating with our federal partners and working through that plan to make sure it's durable and meets all federal statutes so that it can be implemented very soon. We are hoping that in the next few months, within the next few weeks, actually, that plan will be going public. We'll have a round or two of public comments to gather that information so that we can have a very durable plan for a long-term sustainable solution for the rattlesnake quivira issue for not just the next 5 years, not next 10 years, but next 50 years. Have it, the strategic implementation effort, been focusing on multi-generational solutions. That's what we're looking at on this one, is a 50-year solution plus, and have that be coordinated with all the appropriate state and federal agencies to make that go forward. And so that, again, hopefully that will be coming to the public here in the next few weeks to a month, so that we can wrap that up mid-year this year as the planning phase and get into the design and implementation of that project. I can't say what that project will actually be, otherwise I'm violating federal statutes, again, like last year. But again, stay tuned. It is moving very fast. It is currently in Washington, D.C., being evaluated under administration to make sure that it's meeting the administrative portion. It's already met the technical. Now it's got to meet the T's crossed, I's dotted for administration of the plan. So that is the big project in our district, and so it takes a lot of our effort. Next page. I'm going to skim down quite a bit. Again, we've been active in the short-term water quantity issues in the rattlesnake and working with the local working group that's been led by Kansas Department of Agriculture, DWR, to try and put together measurable progress to stave off broad-scale administration in the region, but to have conservation efforts being brought forward by the local water users in a very effective manner. We are active in that, and right now we do have 2025 secured for no administration in 2025, and we're currently working toward 2026 while these long-term watershed plan efforts are being brought online. Like Tim said, GMD5, we kind of piggybacked on that. Central Kansas, we're pretty heavy in data collection. We gathered about 250 water quality samples last year, and then analyzed those in-house. And then we also had about 1,500 water level measurements from our 250 sites that we gathered with our staff over the last year. So we do pride ourselves on being data hungry and data rich. I'm always going to be voracious about following the data. What the data says we need to be doing, we're going to do it. We're not going to shy away from it. And so in our data collection for the last year, again, we've been focusing on water quality. And so that's what we've been mobilizing and getting our equipment set up for. And so in 2025, going forward, we're really looking to emphasize that effort and focus around specifically small municipalities and kind of target those areas to make sure that we're sampling those to get a good background of what the water quality currently is doing for chlorides and for nitrates, because there are some concerns in our area for those. That's our primary focus for 2025. Page 7, if I could. We've been closed to new appropriations for many, many years. So when you're talking about you can't get a new permit, so what do we do if your well goes bad? Or if you have an area that's using too much water and it has declines, what do? Our focus has been on shifting that water around and reallocating and moving and allowing water transfers to happen. So we have 2 regulations that effectively do that, KR 52522 and KR 52518. I've referred to those in the second paragraph of that page. Been working with the Division of Water Resources on how to properly take a look at that using modeling to make sure that we're not taking an issue in one area and shifting it to a new area. So we're kind of keeping track of that as we go forward, so we're not creating new problems somewhere else while we're trying to solve another problem currently. If I could kind of jump forward a few more times. Water modeling on page 8. We pride ourselves, again, to be data voracious. We're very keen to follow the data. We are the only district that has a water model that is not curated and updated by Kansas Geological Survey. We do that all in-house with our consultant out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so it does come at a cost. But again, it's independently verified and peer-reviewed by KDA. And I would contend, I'm not going to speak for the agency, but we all believe that water model is the appropriate tool to use for water management in the region. And we are wrapping up a very thorough model update to bring that up to speed for very recent years. So that model report should be pending in the next few weeks. With that, we do have our annual our action plan according to the new statute 82.81044. That action plan was submitted to the chief engineer in July of this year. In accordance with that, and it was accepted by the chief engineer in July, on July 9. In the months following that, we had a very thorough public outreach effort to solicit, okay, what are we doing, what aren't we doing? Should we be making modifications to how we're managing the aquifer in the region, whether it's water quantity or water quality? If you could skip forward to page 10, please. And so our management program was approved by the board in November and into December, and it's submitted to the chief engineer for review to state statutes and applicable laws in December of 24. Recently received that back to our office contingently approved if we were to make some revisions. And so we're currently working with the state to work through those revisions to make sure that we're in alignment with those revisions before we go back to the public and unveil that to the public again in a public hearing and have that adopted. In the pages following is our action plan, is our priority areas of concern that were identified. We identified 2 existing water quantity areas, our Pawnee Valley and Walnut Creek IGUCAs. Both of those were established in the early 90s due to some declines that were being seen. We've requested annual significant reviews of those, and those are still pending. I do direct you to the state's website for those. They keep a very good record of the activity for those IGUCAs. And then we do have a new established water quantity area of concern. It's the Rattlesnake Creek region, which is no surprise to anybody that's following what's going on in central Kansas. And really, our focus for that for the coming year is to take those short-term projects, marry those with the long-term projects that are coming online, and that'll become our action plan that we're going to be adopting in 2026. And so we're hoping to have that wrapped up in plenty of time, have significant public outreach through that time for that effort in the Rattlesnake. Like mentioned before, water quality is always a concern. We have a currently established water quality area for chlorides, We call it the mineral intrusion area. It's right around Quivira. That's a naturally formed intrusion of poor quality chlorides down below that interact with our surface water, or with our shallow groundwater, and they just mineralize that formation. And so we have pretty significant chloride presence in that region. So we have some special regulations that govern how that's managed. The board, again, is data hungry. And so we had a few areas for water. We had one for water quantity and one for water quality that we're just still gathering data for. We're not quite sure. We reached out to Kansas Geological Survey in early '24, say, okay, we see this area in Edwards and Kiowa County. We see there's some declines. What would be an appropriate approach to it? So if you could turn to page 15, please. That is our supplemental area of concern for water quantity. In the Edwards-Kiowa County region, we see over the last 20 years, the decline was a total of 10 feet over that 10-year period, up and down. So it's about an average of a half a foot a year. And so the board is working in that area to say, okay, what is reasonable raising and lowering of our water table? What is reasonable? Trying to nail down that definition. And so that is an area that we're taking a good look at. And again, this RCPP that's coming online very soon. Hopefully we do anticipate targeting efforts for that to hopefully do some voluntary efforts there. There's already work in that area for the WISE program at the Water Office and some existing Rattlesnake Creek programs for technology. So we're hoping to ramp that up with the RCPP to fully identify what this area is doing. Again, the water table is declining a little bit, but it's not significant. We believe that if we were to be able to stabilize this area, Kansas Geological Survey says for the entire district, we're within 1.6% of perfectly stable. So if we were to stabilize this specific area, that 1.6 really becomes really small at that point. And then the next page is our water quality area under consideration. You notice it's the entire district because we're still gathering data for nitrates. And so we're going to be focusing around the municipalities and small domestic wells to get that data and fill in data points. And so we have a significant number of wells in the area. And so we're really hoping to get about 300 or 400 samples done this year. Ourselves work with Kansas Geological Survey in their efforts to sample additional 300 wells in the area, and then working with K-State Geopaths that's been doing several domestic wells in the region over the last several years, and try and marry all that data together to have a really solid database so we can find those hotspot areas. And with that, it's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. I'd love to stand for any kind of questions the committee may have.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Warren, for that. Can you explain to me how you come into being a landowner? Was that a retiring water right donation or a fee purchase?
Yeah, so how did the district become a water right owner and or a landowner? Why is the big question we get asked. What it was is the area that those parcels are in is that rattlesnake area. So that's in an area that we're looking to put in some wells for monitoring, as well as potential for larger projects in that area. And that land came available on the market, free market, and we were able to secure that using our funds. And again, as soon as we acquired it, we spoke with the previous owner, said, okay, who is your tenant? Let's maintain that previous tenant. And then when the statute was changed here recently, we went ahead and went through the proposal process and sent those out for bid and secured those. Again, I'm not in a land management goal. That's not my goal at all. That land came available. Again, the statute says we can only own up to 1,000 acres. So we're very close to that threshold already. I don't want to be a land manager. My goal is to try and turn that back to the farmers once our projects are moving forward.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Recently, you've done some augmentation into the Rattlesnake Creek. Can you briefly talk about that?
I will do my best. That's not us. Again, I'm in the midst of this federal project that is considering augmentation. So if GMD 5 were to do it, we'd be violating state statutes. That is actually part of this working group effort to see the feasibility of augmentation. And that's actually been spearheaded by the Division of Water Resources and local efforts there. And so from my early understanding of what the data is showing, it's very successful and is really increasing our reliance and hope that's going to be the durable solution. But again, that's not our project right now. You'd have to speak with the agency about that one.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Orrin. First, I do want to say I appreciate how you guys have also approached your priority areas of concern. I think a lot of the additional monitoring you're doing around water quality is going to be beneficial data to see how we can address some of those ongoing challenges. I do want to dig into Quivira a little bit. I'm sure you're not surprised. You know, so we've been hearing about this environmental impact study for years at this point. And in my view, from where I'm sitting, it really looks like the working group is the group that is coming up with tangible solutions for the GMD at this point, whether it's DWR doing the augmentation pilot, whether it's Farm Bureau and KLA and producers working together to put together a water conservation area proposal. You know, I think those are real solutions that can make a difference. And, you know, I'm happy to eat my words if this environmental impact study and the consulting comes back with a miracle solution. But I feel like it's going to be a multifaceted challenge, and I think a lot of these initiatives that are happening on the ground are beneficial towards that end. So I guess, you know, my question is, and I'm also not aware of, you know, state statutes, federal statutes that would prohibit the GMD from participating in these activities or being part of a pilot augmentation. And, you know, please feel free to prove me wrong on that. But I'm just wondering, what is the GMD doing outside of this environmental impact study to actively address this problem that has been ongoing for years? And from where I sit, other people are currently solving that problem for the GMD.
Okay. That's fair. And I share the frustration with the speed at which it's moving. It's moving incredibly slow. I share that concern. So I will say this. Federal statutes, when you're undergoing an environmental impact statement like this, if you begin a project that is being considered in your plan, and that plan is considering augmentation, that plan is considering water right purchase and retirements, that plan is considering LEMAs, WCAs, broad-scale administration, it's considering all those things and more. Phreatophyte removal, tree removal, those types of things. If the GMD, the sponsor, actively promotes a program while they're in the planning phase like we are, it's considered pre-decisional to the outcome of that plan. That is the guidance we've had from the from NRCS and legal counsel. So it's considered pre-decisional. So we've predetermined the outcome of our plan, and we're starting to implement the plan prior to the plan being developed. And so as a result, my hands are tied. Again, I would love to be taking our resources and kicking them in to help out the camp program and really get that off the ground, to help out with the pilot augmentation. I would love to be able to put our water rights toward that we own, because they're strategically placed to be able to do that. We just can't. So like I said, I would love to mobilize there, but until we have this plan finalized, which again, it's been ongoing with the NRCS, in 2024, we had a significant slowdown in the technical review to the tune of about 6 months slowdown over what we were anticipating. And so with that aside, we already be done with our plan, and we'd be mobilizing and implementing today. But we're moving as quick as we can with our federal partners. In the meantime, we are active in the working group. And so if asked, this is again, according to guidance, if asked, the GMD can provide data that we're working on in the EIS. If we're asked with that question, what is your preliminary studies look at for augmentation? We can provide that data to KDA or whomever and to supply that. What's the current price for water rights? We can supply that information according to our studies. But again, until we get through this planning phase, again, we're shooting for July of this year, then we can start mobilizing. In the meantime, we're working with DOC and NRCS again for the RCPP to look at implementing water technologies. That is part of the plan, but we're not the project sponsor for the RCPP, so we're not violating state statutes or federal statutes. So it's a fine line. walking that razor's edge. But again, I'm just following legal counsel and our federal partners on what I can and can't do. Believe me, when that working group came out in January, I said, okay, NRCS, what can I do? How can we help out? What can GMD do? And they said, nothing. You go and attend meetings and provide data as you can, but that's it. Great. So our hands have been largely tied in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Orrin. I guess a follow-up question to that. So I know that there were ongoing conversations about the development of a WCA. What happened to that? And I mean,
Sure.
I assume that, I mean, the GMD would want to be involved, but they would not have to be involved. That's the purview of DWR. So why was that rejected by the board? If that was the case, why didn't that move forward?
I would hesitate to say rejected. And so, according to state statutes, once a WCA is ready for GMD review, we have 45 days to review that. We took a look at that in November, said, okay, it's complex. Legal counsel wanted to take a look at it to make sure that it wasn't going to violate any kind of statutes that we may or not have been aware of. In December, that came back to the board for consideration. The board said, yeah, we like the idea. We're not sure how many folks are going to participate, but it's a good idea. But we have some concerns. And so we raised those concerns about operating that type of a WCA in the same realm as an active water bank. It's doing water bank-like activities without going through water bank statutes to establish a charter. So in our view, that was a violation of state statutes. If we're wrong, we're wrong. These are purely recommendations. We did not recommend for or against. We just said, hey, we have some concerns about it, and we suggested revisions to make it comply with those state statutes. So it was not a confrontational, in my view, it was not a confrontational saying we're opposed to it. We said, here's some concerns we have. Here's some revisions that we think would make that work. And at that point, it's been radio silence. We've not seen any kind of revisions since then. I know that there's been revision, work to revise that, and hopefully that can come and be successful.
Well, I do look forward to seeing the recommendations in July. I think, I am critical today, but I do applaud the producers and the working group and the people who have been working together to address this challenge and meeting their goals thus far for Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I see a lot of promise, and I see a lot of the good work that's happening, and I hope the GMD is a part of that and when they get that information in July, because I think there are real solutions, and you guys are really close, and I hope that continues to move forward.
Oh yeah, if I could, the rattlesnake was my first project when I came on with the district in '06. And it was data, go gather data, water levels, water quality, those types of things. And I've been working on it, that's been my baby for years. I'm gonna follow the data. I'm gonna follow the programs that are required to make this thing sustainable and make it work. We've offered solutions before that we believe were sustainable and workable at the time, rejected or whatever, those types of things. I am like a dog on a bone, so to speak. We're gonna see this thing through. I've made that commitment to the board and to the public. Until a court tells me to stop because I'm doing something in violation of statute, we're going to move forward and have a durable solution.
Representative Pishney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Orrin. I really appreciated your presentation, as I have the previous two as well. On page 9, you talk about the Water Bank Association and give some information about that, but help me understand it even better verbally with some additional explanation. And as you do that, the present status and what you see in the future with regard to that Water Bank Association.
Sure. And I'm going to be very clear here. I'm no longer the Water Bank manager. That's a change in the last year. Water Bank Association is a private, not-for-profit corporation that operates out of our office. It is a program of the district that's started by the district, but it is a separate entity and it has its own separate board and finances and everything. So I want to be very clear with that. So really the driving force behind the Water Bank came out of the rattlesnake originally back in 2000. Those statutes were established in 2004, I believe, 2005, and the Water Bank was established in 2006 initially. It's undergone several changes. I would contend some good, some bad. And I think there's quite a bit that's still to become on revisions. I know the water bank underwent significant revision here this last spring, about a year ago, to implement new changes. I know that they've been working closely with the working group to help be a part of that solution as well, with a brand new water banking program called the Compensated Allocation Management Program, the CAMP solution, to try and facilitate monies going to producers to idle systems so they're not pumping in 2025. In the area that they targeted, they had, I believe, and again, don't quote me too much on this, 37 or 38 water rights that they targeted, and they secured 36 of those. 90+ % of those water rights that they targeted were secured to not pump in 2025. But in general, what the water bank does is has two programs. One is a savings account program. So in a year that you don't use the full allocation of water for your water rights, you can bank into your accounts up to 25% of that unused water for use in the future with some restrictions. So that's the savings account program. That's specific to the location and cannot be transferred around. It's very localized. The second is the deposit lease program, and that is where a producer or a water right holder comes in and says, I'm not going to use my water rights this year or the next few years. I want someone else to use it, and they can transfer that somewhere else and lease it somewhere else temporarily for those next few calendar years. So it kind of helps that reallocation approach that we talked about previously, but on a temporary basis. It's not permanent. It's been very successful and gaining more and more traction every year. I would say the water bank is a very active bank, and they want to be a solution to their area, and we work closely with the water bank manager and that board to make sure that we're working together on goals and aspirations.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up. So it sounds to me, and I understand what you're saying, not the manager now, private entity, not for profit, and so forth. But it sounds to me like, just in your tone, that you believe it's a successful program. Yes. Is it something that's being used by other entities, by other associations and so forth? And if not, should it be? And how do we get that message out there?
Yeah, if I could, I've been a champion of water banking for decades. Obviously, some bias behind ours because we're the first one, only one in the state. The statutes do allow multiple water banks to be established in the state. They just can't overlap on top of each other. And so I've spoken with several entities around the state to see how the water banking statutes may work for their area. I would say that the way that the Central Kansas Water Bank works may not be a good fit for every area. I think pieces of it could be and may be done in a different way, so as long as it meets that statute. Again, once it meets that statute, meets those regulations, they have to apply for and receive a charter from the chief engineer. And that, again, there's a whole regulatory process for that. So how that new charter may look could be completely different. And I would encourage areas to take a look at that because I think it's a very powerful tool that puts that tool in the hands of the water users.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have more of just a general comment than a question, but I personally feel like we're going in the right direction as far as how to deal with the Quivira situation as far as the water augmentation and the water leasing program, because we're basically trying to handle the situation in a way that doesn't damage our local economy by cutting back too far on irrigation. And I think something like a LEMA or WCA would probably be like a last option. I think if these other things didn't work, and it should be pointed out, like Orrin pointed out earlier, that we really don't have a problem with our aquifer in GMD5 like they do in Western Kansas. And in Western Kansas, they basically don't have any other choice but to do the WCAs and the LEMAs. But since we don't have a declining aquifer, we just have a completely different situation. And I think we're just trying the water augmentation and the water leasing and water banks as a way to try to solve the problem without damaging our local economy.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to make a comment. I know earlier I said, You guys are all dealing with entirely different types of situations and conditions. They're very divergent. But I'm aware that recently you five guys, or I'm sorry, leaders in your GMDs are coordinating and collaborating and talking to each other and working through trying to find solutions to each of your problems. And I really appreciate that collaboration. Thank you guys very much.
If I could, in that same tone, I would encourage each of you we have a reception this evening across the street at the Beacon. 4:30? 4:30 to 7, I believe it is. I would encourage you to come over and visit with us, ask questions about what we're doing on a more detailed level. Again, we're open doors. You know, we'd love to speak with you, and hopefully you had a one-pager from each of our districts that was handed to you already. And if not, let me know and I can get that to you to kind of give you a broad scale about what each of us are doing in our areas. But again, we'd love to have you tonight at the reception.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Orrin.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any comments for the good of the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned.